Before we begin, here's a brief overview of some important terminology to know for Beyblade X. First, the parts. The blade is the top of the Beyblade. This is the part that makes contact with other blades. The ratchet is the middle part. It helps to determine the height and balance of the blade's impact points. It is also what holds the Beyblade together, or what causes it to explode or burst. Ratchet naming conventions are determined by the number of protrusions and the height of the ratchet. There are currently 3 heights at the time of filming: 80, 8mm, 70, 7mm, and 60, the shortest at 6mm. Recently, an even taller 85, 8.5mm ratchet was released with night mail, but this was not out at the time of filming and won't be relevant for this 4-part series. Height can also be read by the number of notches or indentations on each side of the ratchet. 4 on each side making 8 for 80, 3 on one side and 4 on the other making 7 for 70, and 3 on each side making 6 for 60. So if you had a ratchet that had 3 protrusions and was 6mm tall, it would be called 360. And finally, the bit. This is the tip of the Beyblade, the part that makes contact with the stadium. It will determine the stamina, movement pattern, and extreme dash ability of your Beyblade. Different bits have different burst resistances as well, meaning that some bits are easier to knock off a Beyblade. Winder versus string launcher, this one's pretty simple. Winder is your traditional Beyblade launcher with a ripcord that you pull out of the winder. And the string launcher has a string that you pull that stays attached to the launcher. Additionally, there are 4 types of victory conditions in Beyblade X, each garnering a certain amount of points. Worth 1 point is the stamina finish, sometimes referred to as a spin or survival finish. This is the most basic type of victory. It is achieved simply when the opponent's Beyblade stops spinning. Worth 2 points is the over finish, often referred to as a stadium out or knockout finish. This occurs when the opponent's Beyblade is knocked out of the stadium or into one of the pockets. Also worth 2 points, now that it's no longer the primary gimmick, the burst finish. This victory gimmick was introduced in the prior generation, Beyblade Burst, and occurs as one might assume when a Beyblade bursts, or in other words, explodes or falls apart. If any part of the Beyblade fully disconnects and separates from the Beyblade, it is considered a burst. And finally, the main gimmick of Beyblade X, an extreme finish. This occurs when a Beyblade utilizes the extreme dash line, that zipper around the stadium, to knock the opponent's Beyblade out of the stadium through the extreme zone, the opening at the center of the back part of the stadium, in between the 2 pockets. As the main gimmick for this generation, an extreme finish is worth 3 points. To put it a little bit more clearly, there's the basic line, BX, and there's the unique line, UX. The unique line seems to be the second sub-generation in X, rather than using metal launcher hooks at the center of the Beyblades, keeping the center of gravity closer to the middle as in BX. The UX Beyblades have plastic launcher hooks, which causes the center of gravity to be pushed outwards on all the Beyblades. This is mostly contextual speculation on my part, but it's also worth noting that the unique line of Beyblades seem to offer more unique parts as well, with many having more custom and unique features, bits, and gimmicks, as opposed to the basic line, which seemed a bit more standard and a little more uniform. Here's a quick rundown of what that means. So, first things first, if you've spent any time messing around with an X Beyblade, you may have noticed that the bit turns within the ratchet. In one way or another, every bit does this. And on basic line Beyblades, spinning the bit rotates the gear chip as well. Though this feature, along with the chip protector, has been removed on unique line Beyblades for some reason. When I first got into Beyblade X, I was very confused and had no idea why this was a thing. But since then, I've learned that this feature is in place to prevent the Beyblades from just completely losing all of their stamina after riding on the extreme line. If the bits were purely stationary, as the blade tips and bases had been in the past, once they did their extreme dash, they'd basically be dead within a matter of seconds. Because the bit is able to spin, somewhat independently of the rest of the blade, however, they are able to maintain a significant amount of spin after using an extreme dash. Some bits even have more or less gears to affect how quickly they move on the extreme line. So what does that mean for freeball, and what does it mean to be a free spinning bit? Well, the other thing you might notice is that when you twist a bit inside a ratchet, it sort of clicks lightly. This is due to these little clips. People often refer to them as springs, though it's my understanding that there aren't any actual springs involved. Though I'll admit I've never taken one apart to see how it ticks, which also help to hold the bit in place. This is also where the burst resistance aspect comes into play. as bits with high burst resistance will have extra ridges to prevent them from falling out so easily. Free ball, on the other hand, has a smooth ridge near the bottom of the bit that prevents it from clicking, or for lack of a better term, ratcheting in the ratchet. This allows it to spin freely without any resistance while on the extreme line, meaning that unlike the bits that do still lose stamina on the line, free ball in theory does not. Now, the usefulness of such a feature on a bit designed with generally slow and stable movement that does not, in fact, encounter the extreme line very often is up for debate, and it has a pretty low burst resistance too. But regardless of all that, free ball has already become one of my personal favorite bits. Free ball alone isn't necessarily enough to make a meta-breaking Beyblade. However, I've come to find that putting this thing on a wizard rod takes an already powerful meta and makes it nearly unstoppable. Okay, presentation over, let's get back to the battles. Rapid Strike is designed with the blades focusing on the series of small, rough protrusions to hit with a barrage-style attack. Meanwhile, Upper is designed with a focus on these up-tilted wings for a more powerful attack intended to strike your opponents from below. These are based on the original Lightning El Drago from the Metal Fight series, which could be changed into Upper or Rapid Strike mode based on how you rotated the energy ring, the clear plastic part seen here with the dragon motif. I know a lot of people hoped El Drago would be a good Wizard Rod destroyer with its powerful low-profile attacks, but it unfortunately seems to be lacking in other areas, making it not a super viable matchup. With that said, I certainly have more testing I'd like to do with El Drago to see if it can't be made a bit more viable, but that will have to wait for now. In all honesty, my sister always liked Wolborg a bit more than I did growing up, but it still holds a soft place in my heart, especially since it popularized the free-spinning bearing-type spin gear. Bearing tips have always been one of my favorite Beyblade gimmicks. They work simply by having the tip of the Beyblade be free-spinning, helping it to take hits without losing as much stamina. It's funny because on the day I actually pre-ordered Silverwolf, unaware that it would be reintroducing the free-spinning parts into X, debatably for the first time, I had actually complained to Jose during one of our shopping trips that I really wish Takara Tomy would bring back free spinning parts, specifically the dual attack rings and the bearing tips, and in Silverwolf I got both. Though that's also my one major disappointment with Silverwolf as well. I love free ball and it's certainly not a deal breaker, and it is indeed free spinning, but I wouldn't exactly describe it as a bearing bit. It has similar qualities, but as the gimmick itself is built into how the bit connects to the ratchet, rather than mechanically being a separate part in the bit itself, it's not close enough to the mechanics of a proper bearing bit for me to be satisfied. Especially since Freeball's free spinning gimmick is really only felt when it interacts with the extreme line, which it doesn't do often. I still love the bit, but I'm still waiting for a true bearing bit too. Boy oh boy, the Quake bit. I was actually really surprised when I found out this style of bit was back. I suppose I did bring it back during Burst, but somehow I missed that one. The Quake bit, or rather the Quake performance tip, originated back in Metal Fusion with Storm Capricorn. The concept behind the bit is interesting. It's basically chopped at an angle, making the bit extremely off balance and causing it to jump and bounce around. Back in Metal Fight, this was further accentuated by Storm Capricorn's move 145 spin track, which could be used to put the tip off center. Of course, there's no ratchet that does anything similar yet in X. Still, due to the very wonky nature of this bit's shape and movement, it's a fun gimmick, but it suffers from extremely low stamina. With that said, clearly the scientists at Takara Tomy have been learning, because compared to prior versions, or at least the Metal Fight version, the Quake bit in Burst has a lot more stamina than I expected. If used properly, it might even be a viable attack strategy, though I'm sure it would take a lot of practice and finagling to get just right.
Bounce Spike is designed to absorb shock and redirect attacks. Likewise, the metal bearing balls featured in Nightmail are designed for shock absorption, rather than utilizing centrifugal force for balance and stability as we've seen with this gimmick in prior generations. The bearing balls in Nightmail help absorb shock by moving vertically rather than horizontally.